In the mid-1980s, Bob Leach, an avid collector and reteller of stories of Irish Jersey City, in association with the Jersey City Free Public Library, the Irish Cultural Society, and Jersey City State College, now New Jersey City University, conducted a series of oral history interviews regarding the career of long-serving Jersey City Mayor Frank Hague. In 1989, selections of these interviews were compiled as the basis of the following documentary. In conjunction with the June 2023 production of Margo Hammond's play Horseshoe Empire, the New Jersey Room of the Jersey City Free Public Library, in association with the Museum of Jersey City History, is making the video available online. Extended excerpts from the oral history interviews, as well as new interviews with contemporary scholars, will be made available as part of a podcast series in the fall of 2023 as part of the Museum of Jersey City History's initial exhibit on Frank Hague's Jersey City.
Here, at the Holy Name Cemetery in Jersey City, lies the man who built and ran the most powerful political machine this country has ever known. The man who once proclaimed, "I am the law." No matter what the context in which he made that remark, it was true. Mayor Frank Hague was the law in Jersey City for nearly 40 years.
He improved on the methods of Stalin and on Hitler and Mussolini.
Hague did what Prendergast didn't do, what Curley didn't do, what Trump didn't do, what Tweed didn't do, what Croker didn't do, namely, he not only was the boss of the political machine, but he was the headpin running as a candidate.
It was common knowledge when Mayor Hague was in power that the people who worked for him gave him 3% of their salary to be used for campaign expenses.
My endorsement of Governor Moore in no way condones the corrupt practices of the Hudson County political machine embodied in the word Hagueism. That must go.
I would not believe that Mayor Hague is a crook. I would not believe it because he was too generous in his day and in his way.
Hague knew your whole heart of politics, and I agree, is jobs and favors. And he knew how to, through his organization, through his ward leaders and committeemen, this is what he gave to people, jobs and favors.
Most of the people would have said to some their champion, to others their Hitler, they would have said to him, "We thought you would live forever."
The Jersey City Public Library has undertaken an oral and visual history project aimed at preserving the testimony of those who may offer an insight into the character of Frank Hague, along with the values and the demerits of the political system he created. Jersey City State College and the Irish Cultural Society of New Jersey are co-sponsors of our Frank Hague documentary. They believed he would live forever. Mayor Frank Hague was the absolute boss of Hudson County, controlling the Democratic Party, the police department, the judiciary, along with a huge city and county bureaucracy. He was a dominant power in state politics and played a crucial role in the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt as president. Historian Tommy Smith comments on an amazing aspect of Frank Hague's career.
No one ever beat Frank Hague. He was the quintessential boss of all time, and we'll talk about that later, but he was never defeated. He ran 5 times from that point as constable 5 times. He won 5 times. He ran for the Street and Water Commission. He won there. He ran for the commission in 1913. He won there. And from 17 to 1947, of course, he was the mayor, and he never lost. People never talk about it. Frank Hague himself never lost. And why I said he was the quintessential boss of all time is because Hague did what Prendergast didn't do, what Curley didn't do, what Trump didn't do, what Tweed didn't do, what Croker didn't do, namely, He not only was the boss of the political machine, but he was the headpin running as a candidate. In addition to that, he ran probably the most successful political organization and machine in the history of this country.
It was this tenacity of Frank Hague, coupled with historic forces, that enabled the Hague machine to survive into the middle of the 20th century, long after bossism had become an anachronism in the rest of the nation. Thus, what was a turn-of-the-century phenomenon in the rest of the nation is a recent memory here. Here in Jersey City, many remember the night the Hague machine was toppled by the little leader, John V. Kennedy. The municipal election that took place in Jersey City on May 10, 1949, has gone down in history as the wildest election any place ever. After the polls closed, the word got out that Hague had lost. The town went wild as 300 people a minute surged into City Hall Plaza.
To tell you the truth, I was stunned. I didn't believe it. I think we all were. It was like a state of shock. Because, my God, we never anticipated it, you know. It was going to go on forever. And the closest thing to it is the end of the movie, The Last Hurrah, with Frank Skeffington walking through the streets by himself. And 2 blocks away, you see the big celebration going by with all the banners, the screaming, the casket, the torches. Well, it was the same thing in Jersey City. I mean, they mobbed City Hall. Ran through the front steps carrying a casket that was supposed to be for Hague. People were all over the streets. I mean, it was like VJ Day all over again.
May 10th, 1949 was the equivalent to the French Revolution in Jersey City. People were jubilant. They were wild. As a matter of fact, I was down by the grass pot in front of the City Hall just watching what was happening as the crowd was, in a sense, gone out of hand, screaming and yelling freedom, and they were storming, as I saw it as a young fellow, the Bastille, the City Hall, to get into this sacrosanct area that the Hague had ruled for so long a period of time. And my concern was I could hear them saying, let's get them, let's get them. And I envisioned people running after and maybe literally killing these people who were defeated. That's the kind of hatred that existed during that era.
As the crowd carried the mock coffin, they sang the theme song of the victory ticket. Now is the hour for you to say goodbye.
Now is the hour when we must say goodbye. Far across the sea, while you're away, oh, please remember me.
Thus, an extraordinary chapter in American political annals came to an end. The man who wrote that chapter, Frank Hague, had an amazing career which spanned 5 decades. During that period, from 1895 to 1949, Hague left his personal imprint on every aspect of modern American politics. From the days of Woodrow Wilson and the Progressive Era to the relief programs of the Great Depression and beyond. Hague invented Red Scare politics 20 years before McCarthy and during the darkest days of the 1930s. His machine was an efficient provider of badly needed goods and services. His accomplishments are as impressive as his excesses. We begin by examining the very special time and place that gave birth to Frank Hague, Jersey City, around the close of the 19th century. By the end of the Civil War, thousands of Irish immigrants had been drawn to Jersey City by prospects of unskilled employment on any one of some dozen railroads which made the city their eastern terminus. They settled in a grimy industrial section around the area that is now the Holland Tunnel. In 1871, the Republican-controlled State Assembly gerrymandered the area, seeking to confine the upstart Irish in one assembly district. The resultant district had the odd shape of a horse's shoe, and so the largely Irish area became known as the Horseshoe.
Frank Hague was born 1 block away from here on 10th Street. In the early days, all the births took place in the home, and he was delivered by a midwife and supposedly placed on the kitchen table like I guess everyone else was.
Don't forget, he came from a horseshoe where 2 families on a floor would share the same toilet. If you wanted to take a bath, it was in a tub in the kitchen. Sanitary conditions were impossible.
I would say about that time, Hague's father came over from County Cavan. They settled in the 2nd Ward. And Hague, I believe, was the 3rd son of 5 children. Hague, in his early days, worked for the Erie Railroad. He didn't work very long. He said he wasn't going to be a nursemaid to a locomotive. And so he left. And his schooling was not very long either. He was, the story was that he was expelled as an incorrigible from the school. And that always had, they say that had something to do in his later years with establishing the Save the Boy program. He deeply resented that experience in his life. And he was always very athletic. He was, had a fine bearing. He kept his weight down. And while he was a teetotaler, he frequented bars and the like because he used to like to hear the conversation. Jersey City always had political conversation, and that's where you would get it, in the local bars. And along the way, he then met up with Ned Kenny, who was the father of John V. Kenny. And he had a saloon in the Horseshoe. And they called him the mayor of Cork Row. He was a power, a political power.
People felt very kindly toward Frank Hague. He was a good, devoted churchgoer. He was good to the hospitals. St. Francis Hospital, he was good to all his neighbors. And frankly, the people here, locally, enjoyed Frank Hague because he gave them all jobs, which gave them peace of mind, a good night's sleep, and then they could get up and go out to work in the morning because they had something to do. And that's no lie.
Frank Hague was almost the epitome of an Ulster man. I mean, he rarely smiled. As far as I know, he really never had a sense of humor. I mean, he wasn't your Irishman of myth, you know, constantly dancing a jig, running off to the bar. The man never drank in his life, never smoked, I don't think relaxed. Maybe going to the track once in a while or to the fights in the garden in New York, and that was about it. But he had that dour Ulster outlook on life. Everything was real, everything was earnest, and your job was to do what you could for yourself, because nobody else was going to do it for you. And that, of course, was for your family, too.
Although Frank Hague was very much a product of the Horseshoe, he was by no means typical. He distinguished himself from his rough comrades by being a splendid dresser and adopting a stuffy, rigid bearing in public. He had an aura that commanded loyalty. Here, John Longo, who Hague would eventually send to jail on what are now considered trumped-up charges, describes the Hague persona.
Incident in Lincoln High School where a rally was being held for the candidacy of Al Smith for president, and I was sitting in the balcony overlooking the stage, and this huge giant, it seemed to me, was at center stage with a diamond stick pin, blue pants, very natty high collar, and commanding people. There were rows of brass there, firemen and policemen, and he would snap his fingers and tell it, move this way, move that way, and they were all jumping around and at his beck and call. He was like an imperial figure to me, and I turned to this man who turned out to be a committee man, and I says, "Who's that?" He says, "Why, that's your mayor." I said, "My mayor? Gee, that's terrific. My mayor is up there." This was 1928. And then he introduced Jimmy Walker, the mayor of New York, who mesmerized the audience, including me, with his outstanding oratorical ability. He was mellifluous and very eloquent in his speech, his gestures. And when he finished, he would bow at the end of each sentence. And finally, when he finished, he moved toward Hague, and Hague put his two hands on his shoulders and like to knight him and to tell him how good he was. And I was so amazed. I figured, here's the man, the mayor of the largest city in America, bowing and bending to my mayor. He must be an important person. And I could see then, I felt I could have become a Hague man that day, because I was so impressed with him. And I could understand for years later, and I never criticized the Hague followers, I could understand why they felt the way they did about Hague. It had nothing to do with their thinking that he was doing anything for the benefit of the city or not, but they were in awe of him. He had that power.
And Hague got up and made a great speech. One of the most sincere that I ever heard any man ever make. He was far more convincing, far more genuine, far more human than A. Harry Moore ever could expect to be.
It was these personal qualities of Frank Hague that brought him to the attention of party leaders such as Ned Kenny, a saloon keeper who was known as the mayor of Cork Row.
His growing up scene and what Ned Kenny did in terms of running him as a constable in order to offset what Bob Davis had intended to do, namely to run Kenny out of his saloon and put someone else in a saloon that everyone would attend. So he saw this tough kid and he said, "Frank, look, you're a well-liked kid. Suppose you run for constable." "Well, what do I have to do?" He told him what he had to do, gave him $75 or thereabouts, and Hague proceeded to run and win and never was beaten again. He ran 5 times from that point as constable, 5 times. He won 5 times. He ran for the Street and Water Commission. He won there. He ran for the commission in 1913. He won there. And from 17 to 1947, of course, he was the mayor, and he never lost. People never talk about it. Frank Hague himself never lost.
And that night I went to the polling place, and I was shocked. You know, I was very innocent of these things. They opened the box, and they said there's so many people voted. They gave the Hague candidate all the votes except 2. They gave the Republicans 2 votes. And I went and told Grundy about it. He brought me to a lawyer, and he says, we were never able to get anybody to do anything about this. And they wrote up an affidavit, and I signed it. They sent it up to the grand jury and to the prosecutor that here was an apparent fraud.
As a matter of fact, Judge Carey told people when he was running for office, he told people, you ought to go listen to Mayor Hague. See if you can find out how, on a salary of less than $8,000 a year, you can buy a house that's worth about $1 million, then deal down in the seashore on the Millionaire's Row, buy a place down in Miami, and do all that. It's wonderful the way he is able to manage money. Go see if you can find out how he does it.
So then I had to go back and report to Uncle Frank that I got him. Well, I came, Uncle Frank was on the porch of his house in Deal. This is 4th of July, you've got to realize. He had a heavy flannel pajamas on, a heavy camel's hair robe, and a camel's hair cap, because he was almost paranoid about catching colds or having bronchitis, pneumonia, or any chest problems at all, which is why, of course, he built the Pollock. But I made a mistake. I laughed. I got slapped across the face. Never laughed at him again.
A subpoena was issued to Hague to be interrogated regarding his finances. The subpoena was issued, but was not served. They had difficulty in serving it upon Hague. They sent the Sergeant-at-Arms of the New Jersey Senate into Hudson County, and when he went up to 2600 Boulevard, where Hague's apartment was, the Jersey City police arrested the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Senate. Well, that produced a great hubbub.
Well, he ran under the administration at the medical center, and I believe at that time, when you were under Mayor Hague's jurisdiction, or the medical center, or the Margaret Hague, and if you didn't have it, that was it. There was no such a thing as a bill. My mother never received the bill.
Because he was a genius, there's no question about that in his own right. He quickly realized that he didn't want to be the stereotyped Irish politician, if you will. He didn't look like one. He was tall, lanky, tough, physically, and he realized that he had to get on to the progressive movement that was taking place during that period of time in his country. And he surely did that. He became, for a good maybe 10 years, he became a progressive candidate, if you will. That was, of course, until he gained control, and then he used some different methods.